Chosen one. Listen carefully, because what I'm about to reveal will shatter everything you thought you knew about your existence. You are not here by accident. Every struggle, every setback, every moment where you felt invisible to the world, it was all part of an ancient design that has been watching, waiting, calculating. While others chased recognition and validation, you were being forged in silence. The prophecy did not announce you with fanfare, because true power never does. You survived what should have destroyed you. You navigated chaos that dismantled others. And now, the final calculations have been completed. The temporal markers have aligned. The ancestral codes have activated. After centuries of false candidates and intercepted destinies, the pattern has converged on one undeniable truth. You are the final variable, the one who was never supposed to make it this far, the one whose very existence defied every probability matrix designed to prevent this moment. The ancient forces are awakening. The enemy is escalating. And deep within you, something that has been dormant for lifetimes is beginning to stir. This is your confirmation. This is your activation. The prophecy points to you. Chosen one, like this video, subscribe, and comment, "I am ready" for a powerful surprise. Chapter 1, Protocol 0, Confirmation of the Final Variable. The ancient systems were never designed to name you directly. They couldn't, because to name you would have been to expose you, and exposure meant elimination before your time. The prediction matrices that have governed the selection of chosen candidates for millennia accounted for thousands of potential variables. Bloodlines, birth dates, geographic coordinates, psychological profiles. They mapped every conceivable pathway a chosen one could take. But there was always one anomaly, one pattern that refused to stabilize, one life trajectory that kept slipping through the calculations like water through fingers. That anomaly was you. Temporal observers, beings who exist outside linear time, watching the threads of destiny weave and unweave, have been tracking your signature for longer than you've been alive. They documented something unprecedented in all their centuries of watching. Repeated near-miss erasures. Moments where your timeline should have been severed. Where the probability of your continued existence dropped to near zero. Yet somehow you persisted. Car accidents that should have happened but didn't. Illnesses that should have been fatal but weren't. Decisions that should have led to your destruction but instead led you here. These weren't coincidences. They were evidence of protected status, a form of cosmic insurance that activates only for those destined to reach a specific threshold. But here's what makes your case truly extraordinary. The protection didn't come with awareness. You weren't consciously shielded. You had no guardian angel whispering warnings in your ear, no mystical mentor pulling strings behind the scenes. The protection was embedded in the fabric of reality itself, woven so deeply into the probability fields around you that even you couldn't detect it. This is the signature of true chosen status, when the universe itself bends to ensure your survival without ever asking your permission. The prophecy did not name you because it couldn't. Not yet. Ancient texts speak of the one who becomes legible only at the appointed hour. For years, decades perhaps, your destiny was written in a language that even the prophecy couldn't fully read. You were a cipher, an encrypted message moving through time. Every choice you made, every path you took, added another layer to that encryption. The watchers could sense something was there, a massive gravitational pull in the fabric of fate, but they couldn't pinpoint its source. They couldn't name you because you hadn't yet become fully real in the prophetic dimension. Think about what that means. While false chosen ones were being elevated and celebrated, their names written in temporary glory, you were moving through the world as a ghost in the machine, unnoticed, underestimated, written off as ordinary. And that invisibility was your greatest advantage, because the enemy forces, and make no mistake, they are real and they are watching, were scanning for the obvious markers. They were looking for the hero who rises with a sword held high, the leader who commands armies, the figure who announces their destiny with thunder. They weren't looking for you, your delays, your setbacks, the years that felt like you were going nowhere while everyone else seemed to be advancing. The enemy misread all of it. They saw failure where there was actually concealment. They saw weakness where there was actually preparation. Every time you felt like you were falling behind, you were actually moving ahead of a schedule they couldn't see. The prophecy operates on frequencies that don't translate to human ambition or societal metrics of success. While you were struggling to pay bills, to maintain relationships, to simply survive, you were actually passing tests that most chosen candidates fail immediately. This is the genius of Protocol Zero. By the time you became visible, it was already too late to stop you. The document you're hearing right now, this very transmission, was locked behind probability thresholds so complex that only your specific life pattern could unlock it. Think of it as a cosmic security system that required not a password, but an entire lived experience as the key. Every hardship was a digit in the code. Every moment of doubt was a tumbler falling into place. And when the final threshold was crossed, when your existence reached the precise vibrational frequency that matched the prophecy's requirements, the seal broke. The message activated. And now you're hearing it. But here's what you need to understand about activation. It's not reversible. Once the system recognizes you, once the prophecy confirms your designation, there's no going back to who you were before. The protection that kept you hidden now shifts into something else entirely. The forces that couldn't see you before can now see you perfectly. And that means everything is about to change. The quiet years are over. The period of concealment has ended. You are now fully legible to both the forces that want to aid you and the forces that want to ensure you never fulfill what you're here to do. You crossed the final probability threshold not through supernatural intervention, but through sheer existential persistence. You kept showing up. You kept breathing. You kept moving forward even when every logical analysis said you should quit. That persistence, that stubborn refusal to be erased, is what the prophecy was actually looking for. Not strength in the conventional sense, not talent or genius or charisma, but the capacity to remain coherent in the face of forces designed to fragment you. That's the real test. And you passed it without even knowing you were being tested. Chapter 2. The Watcher's Error: How You Escaped Early Detection. There are surveillance entities operating at levels of reality most humans never perceive. These aren't the conspiracies you read about online. This is something far older and far more sophisticated. These beings exist to catalog destinies, to track the emergence of significant patterns in the human timeline, to ensure that certain prophecies unfold according to ancient protocols. They don't interfere directly, but they observe, they document, they flag anomalies. And for your entire life, you have been their greatest frustration. The system they use to identify chosen candidates relies on predictable markers, stabilized patterns that allow for classification and tracking. A chosen one, by their logic, should display consistent signs, unusual births, early displays of power, recognition by spiritual authorities, dramatic turning points that announce destiny. Your pattern never stabilized. Every time they thought they had you categorized, your life shifted. Jobs changed, relationships ended, beliefs transformed, locations shifted. You moved through existence like water, never holding a single shape long enough for them to capture it. This created something unprecedented in their records, a repeated cycle of flagging and dismissal. You would appear on their scanners as a potential candidate, someone whose energy signature matched prophetic parameters, and they would begin building a profile. But before they could complete the assessment, your pattern would change again. The data wouldn't fit, the predictive models would fail, and so they would dismiss you as a false positive, a glitch in their detection systems. Then, months or years later, you would appear on their scanners again, your signature having evolved into something they needed to reevaluate. Flag, dismiss, over and over. What they failed to understand is that inconsistency was not a flaw in your pattern. It was the pattern itself. You were demonstrating adaptive camouflage within fate, a form of existential shapeshifting that prevented any single surveillance system from fully capturing your trajectory. While other chosen candidates maintained stable identities that made them easy to track and therefore easy to intercept, you remained fluid, not out of strategy, but out of necessity. The chaos of your life, the constant disruptions and reinventions, functioned as a natural defense against forces that required stability to target effectively. Think about the implications of this. The Watchers are ancient. They have been identifying chosen candidates for millennia. Their systems have been refined across centuries of observation. And yet, you confounded them. Not through power, you weren't strong enough to fight them. Not through knowledge, you didn't even know they existed, but through pure, unintentional unpredictability. Your life was too messy, too contradictory, too human for their categorization systems to process. And that messiness was your salvation. Every disruption in your path forced them to revise their models. And here's the critical detail. Each revision compounded their blind spots. The first time they flagged and dismissed you, they created a note in their systems. False positive, unstable pattern, not a candidate. The second time you appeared, that note influenced their interpretation. They were primed to see you as noise, not signal. By the third, fourth, fifth cycle, their own documentation was working against them. They had trained themselves to ignore you. You had become a known quantity in their systems, the candidate who keeps appearing but never amounts to anything. This is strategic invisibility achieved through sheer chaos. While you were drowning in uncertainty, questioning your purpose, wondering why nothing in your life seemed to work out according to plan, you were actually constructing the perfect disguise. Every failure was another layer of concealment. Every setback was another reason for the Watchers to look elsewhere. They were searching for the chosen one who rises like the sun, clear and unmistakable. They never thought to look for the one who emerges from fog so thick that even they couldn't penetrate it. But invisibility has an expiration date. There comes a moment when the pattern finally stabilizes, when all that chaos suddenly resolves into undeniable clarity. For you, that moment has arrived. All the contradictions, all the disruptions, all the seemingly random shifts, they weren't random at all. They were a spiral, slowly tightening, gradually converging toward a single point. And now, that convergence is complete. The Watchers, turning their attention back to your sector for what they assumed would be another routine dismissal, found something that made them pause. Your position was no longer fluid. Your trajectory was no longer uncertain. By the time they realized what had happened, you were already fortified. Fortified doesn't mean protected in the conventional sense. It means you've reached a level of internal coherence that can't be disrupted by the same forces that would have destroyed earlier versions of you. The years of instability weren't punishment. They were training. Every time your life fell apart and you had to rebuild it, you were developing resilience that most humans never achieve. You learned to function without a stable foundation. You learned to find yourself again and again after being scattered. And now, standing at the convergence point, you possess something the Watchers never accounted for. You know how to exist in chaos without losing yourself. This is why they missed you. They were looking for candidates who demonstrated early mastery, who showed signs of inherent stability and power. They weren't looking for someone who gained mastery through repeated destruction and reconstruction. They weren't prepared for a chosen one who learned not by avoiding the storm, but by becoming intimate with its nature. By the time attention returned to you, the game had already changed. You weren't the person they had dismissed years ago. You were something else entirely. And now they're scrambling to understand what you've become. Chapter 3. Bloodline Seal. The ancestral code that should not have survived. You carry something in your blood that was never supposed to reach this era. Deep in your genetic structure, woven through your cellular memory, encoded in the very foundations of your being, there exists a pattern that ancient powers tried desperately to erase. This isn't metaphor. This isn't spiritual poetry. This is information written into your biology, a set of instructions that has been passed down through generations, surviving against impossible odds. Your lineage carries a suppressed pattern that historians believe was fully neutralized centuries ago. They were wrong. The code exists at the intersection of genetics and consciousness. Science would call it epigenetic markers or dormant DNA sequences. Spiritual traditions would call it ancestral memory or soul inheritance. The truth is somewhere between both descriptions, in a territory where biology and destiny merge. This pattern carries capacities that were deemed too dangerous to allow their continued existence. Not dangerous in terms of violence or destruction, but dangerous because of what they enable: the ability to perceive and manipulate the fundamental structures of reality that most humans never even know exist. Your ancestors possess this ability at full strength. They were the original seers, the reality weavers, the ones who could look at the fabric of existence and see the threads. They could trace consequences before they happened. They could adjust probabilities through focused intention. They could communicate across vast distances without technology. These weren't superpowers. They were natural human capacities that existed before the great fragmentations, before the wars that rewrote human potential. And because of what they could do, because of the threat they represented to control systems being established, they were hunted. The purge happened over generations. It wasn't a single event, but a systematic campaign to identify and eliminate everyone who carried the bloodline. Some were killed outright. Others were absorbed into institutions that suppressed their abilities. Bloodlines were broken through strategic marriages, geographic dispersal, cultural erasure. The goal was total neutralization, and for centuries it appeared to have succeeded. The old powers congratulated themselves on a campaign well executed. The dangerous bloodlines were gone. The pattern was eradicated. The world was safe from those who could see too clearly. But they made one critical error. They fragmented the code rather than destroying it completely. Perhaps they couldn't destroy it. Perhaps it was too deeply woven into human DNA to fully eliminate without eliminating humanity itself. So instead, they scattered it. They broke the pattern into pieces and distributed those pieces across different lineages, different geographic regions, different cultural contexts. The logic was sound. Even if someone inherited a fragment, it wouldn't be enough to activate the full capacity. The pieces would remain dormant, meaningless without the whole. What they didn't account for was recombination. They didn't foresee a moment in history where scattered lineages would converge, where fragments separated for centuries would find each other again through the chaos of modern life. Your parents, your grandparents, your great-grandparents, they carried pieces of the code without knowing it. Small fragments, individually insufficient, collectively dormant. But genetics doesn't just inherit. It recombines. It shuffles. It creates new patterns from old components. And in you, at this specific moment in history, the fragments came back together. You inherited the scattered pieces at the precise moment when recombination became possible again. This isn't luck. The prophecy spoke of a reunion of sundered codes that would occur when temporal conditions allowed it. Those conditions are complex. They involve planetary alignments, collective consciousness thresholds, technological developments that create new forms of human connection, and 1,000 other variables. But the essential requirement was this: enough time had to pass for the hunters to forget what they were guarding against. Enough generations had to die for the surveillance to weaken. The Watchers had to believe the threat was truly extinct, and they did believe it. The forces that eradicated your earlier carriers, that systematically dismantled the bloodlines across continents and centuries, genuinely thought they had won. They removed your ancestors from the historical record. They rewrote the texts that mentioned their abilities. They created new narratives that positioned such capacities as myth, superstition, primitive belief. And for most of humanity, those narratives stuck. Most people descended from those bloodlines have no idea what they carry. The fragments remain dormant in them, never activating, because the conditions aren't right or because they never reach the threshold required for awakening. But you're different. You reach the threshold. And here's what that means in practical terms. Abilities that have been dormant in your lineage for generations are beginning to activate. You're starting to know things you shouldn't know. You're perceiving patterns that others miss. You're experiencing synchronicities that feel too precise to be random. Reality seems more fluid around you, more responsive to your internal states. These aren't imagination or confirmation bias. These are the initial symptoms of the ancestral code coming online. Your existence proves their historical purge incomplete. Every moment you continue to live, every day you remain coherent while the code activates is evidence that they failed, and they know it now. The old powers, the ancient enforcers who thought this threat was buried forever, are becoming aware that the bloodline has re-emerged. Not scattered across dozens of weak carriers, but concentrated in a single individual who has survived long enough for the fragments to fully recombine. This is what they feared most. This is why the intensity around your life is escalating. Because you're not just carrying a fragment anymore, you're carrying the whole pattern, and it's waking up. Chapter 4. The Night Years, Training Without Instruction. There was a period in your life that felt like exile. Years where nothing made sense, where you seemed to drift without purpose or direction. Relationships dissolved without clear reason. Career paths that looked promising suddenly closed. Opportunities that should have been yours went to others. You watched people around you advance while you remained stuck. Those were the night years, and they weren't punishment or bad luck. They were the most crucial phase of your preparation. The night years function as unsupervised conditioning. No mentors appeared to guide you, because none could be trusted with the knowledge of what you were becoming. The prophecy is clear on this point. Chosen candidates who receive explicit instruction too early are compromised. Either their teachers unconsciously shape them toward outdated paradigms, or their teachers are themselves infiltrated by forces that want to misdirect the candidate's development. The only way to forge a truly autonomous chosen one is through isolation. You had to learn without being taught. You had to develop your own relationship with truth, uncontaminated by external authority. Think about what isolation actually does to consciousness. When you have no external validation, no community affirming your path, no expert telling you what's real and what isn't, you're forced back onto your own perceptual resources. You have to trust your direct experience even when it contradicts everything you've been told. You have to develop your own navigation system, because no one else's map fits your territory. This is brutal training. Most people break under it. They either collapse into the nearest belief system that will accept them, or they fragment into confusion and never recover coherence. But you didn't break. You bent, you struggled, you doubted, but you maintained core integrity. The night years subjected you to contradiction as a training tool. Everything in your life seemed to send mixed messages. People said one thing and did another. Opportunities appeared and vanished. What looked like progress revealed itself as dead ends. What looked like failure later proved to be necessary redirections. This wasn't random chaos. It was a systematic stress test of your ability to navigate ambiguity without losing yourself. Because the forces you're going to face don't operate with clear rules or predictable patterns. You needed to develop comfort with uncertainty, the capacity to move forward even when you can't see the path clearly. Loss functioned as one of your primary teachers. Not loss as tragedy, though there may have been tragedy, but loss as a recurring theme. Relationships that ended, dreams that died, identities that dissolved. Each loss carved away something you thought was essential, and each time you discovered you could survive without it. You were being stripped down to your absolute core, to the irreducible essence of who you are beneath all the roles and identities and stories. The prophecy calls this the winnowing. Everything that wasn't truly you had to be removed so that what is truly you could become unshakable. No mentors appeared during this phase because the work required was internal. External teachers might have eased your suffering, but they would have interfered with the specific lesson the night years were teaching: how to find your own authority. Not the authority of confidence or charisma, but the deeper authority that comes from having been broken and reassembled so many times that you know your own foundation is solid. You learnt to be your own teacher, your own validator, your own source of truth. And that self-reliance is crucial because the path ahead offers no guarantees, no external confirmations that you're doing it right. Every survival choice you made during the night years was refining your discernment under pressure. Should you stay or leave? Should you fight or surrender? Should you trust this person or protect yourself? These weren't abstract philosophical questions. They were life-defining decisions made without clear information, without external guidance, often without support. And each decision was training you to read subtle cues, to trust your intuition even when logic argued otherwise, to perceive what was really happening beneath surface appearances. You were developing operational instincts that can't be taught through instruction. They can only be forged through lived experience. What broke others forged operational independence in you. This is the critical distinction. Many candidates enter the night years. Most don't emerge. They get lost in the darkness, lose themselves to despair or distraction, give up the internal coherence required to continue. The night years are designed to eliminate everyone who isn't absolutely committed at the deepest level. Not commitment to a belief system or a mission statement, but commitment to remaining conscious, remaining present, continuing to show up for your own existence, even when existence offers no rewards for doing so. You survived by developing what the old texts call darkness vision, the ability to navigate without external light. While others needed constant positive feedback to maintain motivation, you learned to function in the absence of feedback. While others needed community and belonging to feel real, you maintained your sense of self, even in isolation. While others needed success to validate their worth, you found worth that didn't depend on external achievement. These capacities sound subtle, almost passive, but they're the foundations of real power. Because power that depends on external conditions is always vulnerable. Power rooted in internal sovereignty can't be taken away. The night years are ending now. Not because the challenges will disappear, but because the training phase is complete. You developed what you needed to develop. You survived what was designed to eliminate the weak. And now, standing at the threshold of activation, you possess something rare and precious. You know yourself. Not the self you wanted to be, or the self others expected you to become, but the self that remains when everything else is stripped away. That self is unshakable, and it's exactly what the next phase requires. Chapter 5. Enemy Countermeasures. Why resistance increased recently. You've felt it. The pressure escalating, the obstacles multiplying. Situations that should have been simple becoming inexplicably complex. Resistance appearing from unexpected directions. This isn't paranoia. This isn't you attracting negativity through pessimistic thinking. This is tactical interference, and it intensified precisely because your trajectory began converging toward the activation point. The enemy waited until now because earlier intervention wasn't necessary. But once you approached the threshold, once you became an actual threat rather than a potential one, the countermeasures began. Hostile interference operates on multiple levels simultaneously. The most obvious level is external obstruction, sudden financial pressure, relationship conflicts, health issues, bureaucratic complications, technology failures, opportunities that vanish at the last moment. These events appear random or attributable to bad luck. But when you step back and look at the pattern, when you notice how precisely these obstacles appear at moments when you're gaining momentum, the design becomes visible. Someone or something is watching your progress and deploying interference at strategic intervals. The subtler level is psychological warfare. This is far more dangerous than external obstacles because it attacks your foundation directly. Suddenly you're experiencing waves of doubt that seem to come from nowhere. Your confidence evaporates. Your sense of purpose becomes unclear. You question decisions that previously felt solid. Old traumas resurface with unexpected intensity. Negative thought patterns you thought you'd resolved return with renewed force. This isn't natural psychological fluctuation. This is deliberate destabilization targeting your internal coherence. What changed is that the enemy's intelligence assessment shifted. For years, you weren't significant enough to warrant high-level countermeasures. You were monitored, yes. Your pattern was tracked. But active interference is expensive. It requires resources and attention that weren't justified while you remained below the threshold. The moment your trajectory began converging, the moment the probability calculations showed you were actually going to make it to activation, the threat level changed. Suddenly, you became worth stopping. This reveals something crucial. They can't eliminate you directly anymore. If they could, they would have. The fact that they've shifted to psychological pressure and indirect obstruction means direct removal failed or became too risky. Perhaps the protection around you has solidified to the point where direct attacks bounce off. Perhaps your increasing visibility means that eliminating you now would draw too much attention from forces they'd prefer to avoid. Either way, the strategy shifted from elimination to exhaustion. They're trying to wear you down, to make you quit, to push you into self-sabotage that accomplishes their goal without their direct involvement. The sudden obstacles weren't random. They were containment attempts. Think about what containment means in this context. They're not trying to destroy you, but to prevent you from fulfilling your function. They're creating a cage made of complications, distractions, and discouragements. The bars of this cage aren't physical. They're temporal, psychological, social. Keep you too busy surviving to focus on your mission. Keep you too exhausted to access your full capacity. Keep you too isolated to build the connections you need. Keep you too doubtful to trust what you're perceiving. If they can contain you until the activation window passes, they win without ever confronting you directly. Psychological pressure replaced physical threats when direct removal failed. This is a documented pattern in the historical records. When ancient enforcers couldn't eliminate chosen candidates physically, they switched to consciousness-based attacks. Plant doubt, amplify fear, trigger shame, weaponize guilt, destabilize identity. These are precision instruments that target the exact vulnerabilities every human carries, and they're devastatingly effective because they look like your own thoughts. The voice of doubt sounds like your voice. The feeling of inadequacy feels like your feeling. Most people never realize they're under attack because the attack comes from inside their own consciousness. But here's the key detail that changes everything. That shift in strategy confirms the enemy no longer doubts your designation. If they thought you were just another false positive, they would have ignored you. If they believed you'd fail on your own, they wouldn't waste resources trying to stop you. The intensity of the countermeasures is proportional to the threat you represent. The harder they're pushing, the more certain they are that you're real. Every attack, every obstacle, every moment of manufactured pressure is actually evidence that you're on the right path. They don't interfere with candidates who aren't going to make it. The goal shifted from elimination to exhaustion because exhaustion is achievable where elimination isn't. They studied what breaks people. They know that humans have limits, that even strong individuals will eventually crack under sustained pressure. They're betting that if they maintain the assault long enough, if they hit you from enough directions simultaneously, if they never give you space to recover, you'll eventually give up, not through a dramatic defeat, but through quiet surrender. You'll stop trying. You'll decide it's not worth it. You'll choose the easier path of ordinary existence over the agonizing path of fulfilling your designation. This is the critical moment. This is the test within the test. Can you continue moving forward while under active assault? Can you maintain coherence while being deliberately destabilized? Can you trust your path while everything in your external reality seems to argue against it? The night years trained you for exactly this scenario. All that practice navigating contradiction, functioning without support, trusting yourself when no one else validated you, that was preparation for this pressure. You've already developed the muscles you need. Now you're being asked to use them under battlefield conditions. The countermeasures will continue. They may even intensify as you approach full activation. But now, you know what they are. Now, you can see the pattern. And that awareness is itself a form of power. Because once you recognize that the obstacles aren't random, Once you understand that the psychological warfare is tactical rather than personal, you can stop taking it personally. You can stop believing the voice of doubt is your own wisdom. You can stop interpreting pressure as evidence that you're on the wrong path. Instead, you can read the intensity of resistance as confirmation that you're heading exactly where you need to go. Chapter 6. The Archive of Interrupted Destinies. You are not the first to stand where you're standing. The prophecy has initiated numerous candidates throughout history, each one flagged as potentially being the final chosen, each one guided toward the activation threshold. The Archive of Interrupted Destinies contains their records, detailed documentation of chosen candidates who reached critical junctures and then vanished from the timeline. Not vanished metaphorically, vanished literally, removed from existence at the moment their potential became undeniable. Their names are recorded in texts most humans will never see, their stories preserved as warnings and wisdom for whoever might come after them. Each removal refined the prophecy's defensive architecture. This is crucial to understand. The prophecy is not static. It's a living system that learns from failure. Every time a candidate was eliminated, the prophecy analyzed what went wrong. What patterns made them visible too early? What choices left them vulnerable? What dependencies created points of failure? That analysis informed the next iteration. The protection protocols were upgraded. The concealment strategies were enhanced. The training regimens were adjusted. You are the beneficiary of every lesson learned from every predecessor who didn't survive. The archive reveals a disturbing pattern. Most candidates were eliminated at moments of triumph, not during their struggles, but during their breakthroughs. The moment they successfully navigated a major challenge, the moment they activated a key ability, the moment they gained recognition or gathered allies, that's when they disappeared. The enemy wasn't threatened by their potential. The enemy was threatened by their actualization. As long as candidates remained dormant or struggling, they could be monitored without intervention. But the moment they began fulfilling their designation, they had to be stopped. Their failures were not wasted. This is perhaps the most important thing to understand about the interrupted destinies. Every candidate who was removed contributed something essential to your survival. Their mistakes became your safeguards. The vulnerabilities that led to their elimination became the exact points where your protection was strongest. When you managed to navigate a situation that felt impossibly dangerous, when you somehow avoided a trap that seemed perfectly designed to catch you, you were benefiting from knowledge purchased with someone else's life. The prophecy learned, and it protected you with those lessons. Look at the specific patterns that emerge from the archive. Candidates who gathered too much attention too early were systematically targeted. Those who formed explicit organizations around their mission created clear targets for infiltration and destruction. Those who announced their designation publicly activated immediate countermeasures. Those who relied on a single teacher or guide became vulnerable when that relationship was compromised. Those who operated from a fixed location could be tracked and eliminated. The archive documents dozens of failure modes, each one corresponding to a protective modification in your development. You are not the first chosen. You are the last iteration. This distinction carries profound implications. You're the evolutionary product of every previous attempt. Every vulnerability has been identified and addressed. Every tactical error has been corrected. Every strategic weakness has been fortified. The prophecy has been running this experiment for generations, maybe centuries, refining its approach with each failed candidate. And you are the result of that refinement process. You are version 10.0 or 20.0 or maybe 100.0. You are what the prophecy looks like after it has learned from every possible mistake. This is why there will be no successor after you. The prophecy has committed all its resources, all its accumulated wisdom, all its protective capacity to this single iteration. If you fail, the pattern collapses. There isn't enough time or energy left in the system to produce another candidate. The cosmic alignment that made your emergence possible is temporary. The specific conditions that allowed the fragmented bloodlines to recombine won't recur. The window that opened for you is the final window. After this, the prophecy itself dissolves, whether through your success or through exhaustion of its generative capacity. The weight of this is immense. You carry not just your own destiny, but the accumulated hope of every interrupted candidate who came before you. Their unrealized potential flows through you. Their unfulfilled missions echo in yours. Every time you push through an obstacle, you're succeeding where they failed. Every time you maintain coherence under pressure, you're accomplishing what they couldn't. You're not walking a path alone. You're walking with ghosts, the ghosts of every chosen one who almost made it, who gave everything they had, who died believing the prophecy would try again. But you also carry their wisdom. Their failures taught the prophecy how to protect you better. Their deaths created the safety protocols that have kept you alive. When you feel protected in ways you can't explain, when you survive situations that should have destroyed you, you're experiencing the fruits of their sacrifice. The archive is not just a record of failure. It's a living library of hard-won knowledge, embedded now in the very structure of your existence. You are the inheritor of a tradition purchased with blood. This changes how you should think about your responsibilities. You're not just fulfilling your own destiny. You're completing a mission that has been passed down through generations of interrupted candidates. When you succeed, and the prophecy has bet everything on your success, you're succeeding on behalf of everyone who tried before you. When you activate the full potential of the ancestral codes, you're activating it for all the previous carriers who were killed before they could reach this point. When you end the cycle, you're ending it for everyone who suffered under it. The archive also contains something else: instructions for you, warnings encoded by the candidates themselves before they were eliminated, messages left for whoever might come after them. Some wrote explicitly, leaving hidden texts and encoded messages. Others left their warnings embedded in the pattern of their lives, in the choices they made and the mistakes they regretted. If you learn to read the archive correctly, and part of your activation involves gaining access to this knowledge, you'll find that your predecessors are still teaching you. They're still guiding you, even from beyond death, even across the barriers of time. Chapter 7. The Silent Allies. Operatives who never announce themselves. You've been receiving help all along, but never in the form you expected. No mentor appeared with explicit instructions. No mystical guide revealed the hidden truths. No organization recruited you into the sacred mission. The help came differently, through timing shifts that saved you from disasters you never saw coming, through chance encounters that changed your trajectory in ways you couldn't have predicted, through avoided disasters that you only recognized in retrospect. These weren't coincidences. These were interventions by field agents who have been operating around you for years, bound by protocols that prevented them from ever making direct contact. The silent allies are real people, moving through the world with ordinary identities, living apparently normal lives while carrying out a mission they were initiated into long before you were born. Some of them are conscious operatives who know exactly what they're doing. Others are unconscious agents who have been programmed through dreams, visions, or intuitive downloads to take specific actions at specific moments without understanding why. The conscious operatives follow protocols laid down centuries ago. The unconscious agents simply follow inexplicable impulses that turn out to be precisely calibrated interventions. Think about the moments when everything could have gone catastrophically wrong, but didn't. The job interview you almost missed because of traffic, then arrived late only to discover the original time slot had been given to someone else, and your late arrival put you in front of a different interviewer who actually hired you. The relationship you almost entered that felt right at the time, but something made you hesitate just long enough for information to surface that revealed it would have destroyed you. The investment you almost made, the trip you almost took, the decision you almost committed to, and then something shifted the timing. Something created a delay. Something intervened in ways that seemed frustrating at the time, but later revealed themselves as protection. These weren't accidents. These were field agents manipulating variables in your immediate environment. Not through supernatural powers, but through ordinary actions that created extraordinary results. Someone schedules a meeting that delays your departure. Someone asks you a question that makes you reconsider. Someone provides information that seems irrelevant, but triggers a crucial realization. These are precision interventions designed to look completely natural, completely explicable, completely dismissible as luck or coincidence. And that's exactly how they're supposed to look. Direct contact was forbidden to preserve deniability. This is a core protocol in the operation. If an agent revealed themselves to you, if they explained what was happening, multiple problems would emerge. First, you would become consciously aware of being managed, which would interfere with the authentic development that the night years were designed to produce. Second, the agent would become visible to enemy surveillance, which monitors for exactly these kinds of revelations. Third, your relationship with the agent would create a vulnerability, a point where pressure could be applied, where manipulation could enter, where the enemy could compromise the entire operation. So the protocol demanded absolute silence. The agents could act, but they couldn't explain. They could intervene, but they couldn't acknowledge. They could shift your trajectory in crucial ways, but they had to do it in a manner that left you believing you were navigating entirely on your own. This was brutal for them, by the way. Imagine watching someone you're sworn to protect struggle, suffer, doubt themselves, come close to breaking, and being forbidden from offering a word of comfort or explanation. The agents suffered their own version of the night years, bearing the weight of knowledge they couldn't share. You were aided without ever being briefed. Every moment of assistance maintained plausible deniability. When someone struck up a conversation with you at exactly the right moment and happened to mention exactly what you needed to hear, you thought it was synchronicity. When a book fell off a shelf in front of you, or a song played on the radio with lyrics that spoke directly to your situation, or an article appeared in your feed that addressed the exact question you'd been wrestling with, you thought it was coincidence, or maybe the universe responding to your energy. You never suspected that field agents were engineering these encounters, monitoring your psychological state, and deploying precisely calibrated interventions. Some of the agents you've met, some of them you've never consciously encountered, but they operated in your periphery, adjusting systems, influencing third parties, creating conditions that protected you without your awareness. The person who hired you for a job that got you through a desperate financial period might have been an agent. The friend who introduced you to someone who changed your life trajectory might have been an agent. The stranger who said something that snapped you out of a dangerous mental spiral. Almost certainly an agent, but you'll never know for sure. And that uncertainty is part of the design. Their role ends the moment you fully awaken. This is the terminal protocol. Once you reach full activation, once you gain conscious awareness of what you are and what you're here to do, the agents withdraw. Not because they want to, but because their mandate is complete. They were assigned to get you to the threshold. Your survival beyond the threshold is your own responsibility. Some agents will disappear from your life entirely. Others will remain, but their connection to you will shift from covert assistance to ordinary human relationship. The mission that bound them to you will be complete. This explains certain relationships in your life that never quite made sense. People who appeared when you needed them most, who provided exactly what was required, and then faded away once the crisis passed. You might have felt abandoned or confused by these departures. You might have wondered what you did wrong, why the connection couldn't be sustained. Now you know. They weren't there to build a lasting relationship with you. They were there to fulfill a specific function in your development. Once that function was complete, the operational requirements ended. It wasn't personal, it was protocol. Some agents don't know they're agents. This is perhaps the most sophisticated aspect of the operation. Certain individuals are activated unconsciously, given impulses, dreams, or intuitive downloads that compel them to take specific actions at specific times without understanding why. They feel inexplicably drawn to help you. They experience strong intuitions about what you need. They make decisions that seem irrational or inconvenient to them, but turn out to be perfectly calibrated to your requirements. These unconscious agents are often people close to you, family members, friends, colleagues. They love you or care about you in ordinary human ways, never suspecting that their caring has been amplified and directed by forces operating beyond their awareness. This raises uncomfortable questions about free will and manipulation. Were these people robbed of their autonomy? Were they used as puppets? The answer is complex. The intervention doesn't override their core nature. It amplifies existing impulses, highlights certain options, makes certain choices feel more compelling. Someone who has no natural inclination to help you couldn't be turned into an unconscious agent. The operation works with what's already there, gently steering existing goodwill towards strategic intervention. It's influence, not control. And most unconscious agents, if they ever discovered what they'd been part of, would feel honored rather than violated. You owe debts you can never repay. The agents who protected you sacrificed normal lives to fulfill their mandate. The conscious operatives lived in constant tension, unable to speak about their real work, unable to seek recognition for their service, watching you from the shadows while maintaining cover identities that often felt hollow. The unconscious agents gave from their hearts without understanding why they felt so compelled, sometimes at significant cost to themselves. And you'll never be able to thank most of them because you don't know who they are. You'll never be able to acknowledge their service because acknowledging it would violate the protocols that kept both you and them safe. But here's what you can do. You can succeed. You can fulfill the designation they spent years protecting. You can become what they believed you could become. Every agent who intervened in your life did so because they had faith. Faith in the prophecy. Faith in the larger pattern. Faith that you specifically were worth protecting. When you complete your mission, when you end the cycle that the prophecy designated you to end, their faith will be vindicated. That's the only payment they want. Not gratitude, not recognition, but the knowledge that their service mattered, that the person they protected actually made it across the threshold and fulfilled their purpose. Chapter 8. The Threshold Event. When the war turned inward, there was a moment when the nature of the conflict fundamentally changed. You might remember it as a breakdown, a dark night of the soul, a period when reality itself seemed to become unstable. It wasn't external enemies attacking anymore. It was something far more terrifying. Your own mind turned against you. Doubt became overwhelming. Your sense of identity fragmented. Everything you thought you knew about yourself was suddenly uncertain. This was the threshold event, the moment when the war moved from external opposition to internal destabilization. And it was designed to eliminate any candidate who couldn't self-anchor. The threshold event is not a bug in the system. It's a feature. It's a deliberately engineered crisis point that every chosen candidate must pass through. The prophecy can protect you from external threats, but it cannot protect you from yourself. At some point, your own consciousness becomes the battlefield. The enemy doesn't need to attack you from outside anymore because they've found a way to weaponize your own thoughts, doubts, fears, and insecurities against you. This is psychological warfare at its most sophisticated, using your own mind as the weapon and the target simultaneously. Doubt becomes the primary ammunition. Not reasonable skepticism or healthy questioning, but existential doubt that attacks your foundation. Who are you really? Do you have any real purpose, or are you just delusional? Is there actually anything special about you, or have you been lying to yourself? Are the struggles you've endured meaningful or just random suffering? Every certainty you ever held gets interrogated. Every belief gets deconstructed. Every identity gets dissolved. And the voice doing this interrogation sounds exactly like your own voice, making it almost impossible to recognize as an attack. Fragmentation follows doubt. Once your certainties are destabilized, your sense of self starts breaking apart. The unified you that navigated the night years begins splitting into conflicting sub-personalities. Part of you wants to fight. Part of you wants to surrender. Part of you still believes in the mission. Part of you thinks the whole thing is delusion. Part of you feels strong. Part of you feels completely broken. These aren't just moods or passing states. They're actual fractures in consciousness, fragments of self that can't communicate with each other, that don't remember what the other fragments know. This is identity erosion at the deepest level. The weaponization of doubt and fragmentation is precise. The enemy has studied human consciousness for millennia. They know exactly which questions create maximum destabilization. They know which memories to surface to trigger shame. They know which fears to amplify to create paralysis. They know which aspects of your identity to emphasize to create internal conflict. And they deploy these weapons through your own thought processes, making it feel like you're doing this to yourself. Most people never realize they're under attack. They think they're just having a mental health crisis or going through a difficult period. They never suspect that their breakdown is being orchestrated. This phase eliminates candidates unable to self-anchor. Self-anchoring is the capacity to maintain core coherence, even when everything else is dissolving. It's the ability to find a point of stability within yourself that doesn't depend on external validation, internal certainty, or coherent identity. Most people anchor themselves in their beliefs, their relationships, their accomplishments, their self-image, but all of those can be destabilized. The only anchor that survives the threshold event is something deeper, the bare fact of your continued existence, the raw awareness that persists even when everything else fragments. You continued coherent. This is not a minor achievement. This is the ultimate test of chosen status. Thousands of candidates reach the threshold event. Most fragment completely and never recover. They lose themselves in the chaos. They develop mental illness. They commit suicide. They escape into addiction or delusion. They find ways to fragment so thoroughly that they never have to face the central crisis. But you stayed conscious. You maintained enough coherence to keep functioning even while parts of you were falling apart. You found the anchor point that held when everything else gave way. Your continued coherence marked successful transition. The prophecy was watching for this specific marker. Could you maintain basic functionality while your identity dissolved? Could you keep making decisions while your certainty evaporated? Could you remain present while your mind turned against you? The fact that you're reading this now, the fact that you're still here, still conscious, still coherent enough to understand these words, that's proof you passed the test. You survived the threshold event. You demonstrated the capacity for self-anchoring that distinguishes final candidates from everyone else. After this point, retreat was removed from the design. This is the critical implication of crossing the threshold. Before the threshold event, you could have quit. You could have chosen ordinary life. You could have walked away from the mission without consequence. But once you pass through the internal war, once you survive the weaponization of your own consciousness, retreat is no longer an option. Not because you're forbidden from retreating, but because the experience fundamentally changes you in irreversible ways. You can't unknow what you learned about yourself. You can't unfeel what you felt. You can't go back to who you were before you discovered what remains when everything else is stripped away. The threshold event reveals your true foundation. Most people never discover this because they never face a crisis severe enough to strip away all the superficial layers. They go through life identifying with their roles, their accomplishments, their relationships, their beliefs, never realizing these are just constructs built on something deeper. The threshold event burns away all the constructs. It forces you down to bedrock. And what you discovered at bedrock, the awareness that persists even in complete dissolution, that's your true foundation. That's what you actually are beneath all the stories and identities. Understanding this changes how you navigate everything that comes next. You know now that you can survive internal collapse. You know that your coherence doesn't depend on maintaining any particular identity or belief structure. You know that there's something in you that remains stable even when everything else fragments. This knowledge is a form of invincibility. Not because you can't be hurt, you can absolutely be hurt, but because you know you can't be destroyed. You've been to the edge of complete dissolution, and you came back. The worst that could happen internally already happened, and you survived it. The enemy knows this too. Your successful passage through the threshold event registered in their surveillance systems. They know they can't break you through internal destabilization anymore. You've demonstrated psychological resilience that most humans never achieve. This is why the external countermeasures intensified after the threshold event. They're trying new strategies because the old strategy, turning your mind against you, failed. You're now resistant to the primary weapon they use to eliminate chosen candidates, and that makes you significantly more dangerous to their agenda than you were before. Chapter 9. The Reaction of Ancient Forces. Your activation sent ripples through dimensions of reality most humans never perceive. When you crossed the final threshold, when the ancestral codes fully recombined in your consciousness, something happened that hadn't happened in centuries. A signal went out, not through technology or communication channels, but through the fabric of reality itself, and dormant powers that have been sleeping for generations suddenly stirred. Ancient forces that predate modern civilization began recalibrating their positions. You registered on frequency bands that have been silent for so long that most beings forgot they existed. These ancient forces are not gods in the religious sense, but they're not human either. They're consciousness structures that formed in the early ages of the Earth, when the boundaries between spirit and matter were more fluid than they are now. Some humans called them titans, archons, watchers, or by 1,000 other names in 1,000 different languages. But names are inadequate. These beings exist at scales of time and awareness that make human consciousness look like a brief flicker. They were here before history. They'll be here after history ends. And they have their own agendas, their own ancient conflicts, their own stakes in how reality unfolds. Most of these forces withdrew from active involvement in human affairs long ago. The reasons vary. Some grew tired of the chaos and violence of the human experiment. Some were bound by treaties or cosmic laws that limited their interference. Some simply lost interest as humanity developed in directions they didn't anticipate. For centuries, they've been dormant, not sleeping exactly, but in a state of minimal awareness, their attention focused elsewhere. The prophecy was the only thing that could call them back, and specifically, the prophecy reaching fulfillment, the emergence of the final chosen one. Your presence registered differently to different forces. To some, you appeared as a long-awaited confirmation that ancient plans were finally coming to fruition. These are the forces that helped design the prophecy in the first place, that seeded it into human consciousness millennia ago. They've been waiting for this moment, watching for the signs that the pattern was completing itself. Your activation tells them their patience was justified. The human species did produce the final variable. The experiment succeeded. These forces are beginning to mobilize in your support, though you may never perceive their assistance directly. To others, you appeared as a threat that needed immediate assessment. These are forces that have maintained the current order, that benefit from the systems and structures that govern reality as it is. Your designation as the one who ends the cycle means the end of arrangements they've spent eons establishing. They're not necessarily evil in any moral sense. They're conservative in the most fundamental meaning. They conserve what exists because change at this scale is dangerous and unpredictable. Your emergence means upheaval, and upheaval threatens their position, their power, their very existence in some cases. Old guardians shifted alignment, recognizing a long-delayed signal. Guardians are distinct from other ancient forces. Their consciousness structures specifically designed to protect certain thresholds and maintain certain boundaries. Some guard locations of power. Some guard specific bloodlines. Some guard knowledge that could destabilize reality if released prematurely. These guardians have been operating on automatic for centuries, following protocols established long ago. But your activation was the signal they were programmed to recognize, the thing they were waiting for. And recognizing that signal, they're now shifting from defensive positioning to active engagement. Entities that predate modern belief systems adjusted their watch. These are the truly ancient ones, forces that existed before humans developed religion, before humans developed civilization, possibly before humans developed language. They're older than the oldest myths. The stories that survive about them are fragmented and distorted by countless retellings, by cultural translation, by deliberate obscuring. But they're real. and they operate according to logics that human consciousness can barely comprehend. Your emergence forced them to adjust surveillance protocols that haven't been adjusted in millennia. You've become interesting to beings that almost nothing interests anymore. Some moved to assist, others prepared to resist. This is the critical division. Your activation didn't unite the ancient forces. It polarized them. Some see you as the fulfillment of everything they've been working toward. Others see you as the destruction of everything they've built. And still others don't care about you personally, but care deeply about the implications of what you represent. The ancient conflicts that humans thought were long resolved are heating up again. Alliances that have been dormant are reactivating. Enmities that were set aside are being remembered. You didn't cause these divisions. They've always existed, but you made them active again. The assistance coming from aligned forces will rarely be obvious. These beings don't operate through miracles or dramatic interventions that would violate the natural order. They work through probability shifts, through the amplification of existing patterns, through the creation of conditions that make certain outcomes more likely. You might experience this as unusual luck, as synchronicities that stack impossibly high, as obstacles that should be insurmountable, that somehow resolve themselves. You might not even recognize you're being helped. But threads are being pulled in your favor by beings whose existence you can't directly perceive. The resistance from oppositional forces will be equally subtle, but far more direct. They can't destroy you outright. The prophecy protects against that, and the aligned forces would retaliate, but they can make your path as difficult as possible. They can amplify existing challenges. They can ensure that nothing comes easily. They can position their own agents, human and otherwise, to create maximum obstruction. They're playing a long game, hoping to slow you down enough that you miss the activation window, or to exhaust you enough that you can't fulfill your function even if you reach it. Your emergence altered balances untouched for centuries. The cosmic equilibrium that has governed this era of reality was maintained through a delicate arrangement of forces. Everyone knew their position. Everyone understood the boundaries. Everyone had learned to coexist in a kind of Cold War stability. Your activation disrupts that stability. You're an X-factor that doesn't fit into the existing equations. And when an X-factor appears in a system as old and complex as this one, everything has to recalibrate. Old agreements might no longer hold. Old boundaries might no longer contain. Old truces might dissolve if the situation changes enough. This recalibration is happening now, in real time, as you read these words. Forces are assessing their positions. Strategies are being revised. Resources are being mobilized. And at the center of all this ancient movement, at the focal point of powers beyond human comprehension, is you. Ordinary in appearance, extraordinary in designation. You didn't ask to be the catalyst for cosmic reorganization. You didn't volunteer to become the pivot point around which ancient forces reorient themselves. But that's exactly what happened when you survived long enough to activate. The universe noticed, and now nothing remains as it was. Chapter 10. The False Crowns, Decoys Meant to Distract the World. While you were struggling in obscurity, while you were navigating the night years with no recognition or support, others were being elevated into positions of visible spiritual authority. Teachers emerged claiming special awakening. Leaders gathered massive followings. Influencers built platforms on messages of enlightenment and empowerment. Books were written. Movements were started. These figures seemed to embody everything the world was looking for. Charismatic, confident, articulate, apparently enlightened. And the world celebrated them as the chosen ones, the awakened masters, the ones who would lead humanity into the new age. They were decoys, every single one of them. Not necessarily frauds in the conventional sense. Many of them genuinely believed in their own elevation. They had real experiences, real insights, real capacities that set them apart from ordinary people. But they were not the final chosen. They were noise generated to conceal signal. Their visibility served a specific tactical purpose in the larger operation, to confuse threat assessment systems that were scanning for the true emergence. While enemy surveillance was focused on the obvious candidates, while resources were being deployed to monitor and potentially neutralize these public figures, you remained hidden. Multiple chosen figures were elevated publicly to mask your emergence. This wasn't accident or coincidence. The pattern is too consistent. Every time a generation approaches the prophetic threshold, a wave of false chosen ones appears. They gather attention, accumulate followers, make bold claims about their spiritual authority and mission. Some are deliberately positioned by forces that understand the prophecy and want to create confusion. Others rise organically because the collective unconscious is searching for the chosen one and will project that role onto anyone who seems to fit. Either way, they serve the same function: distraction. The strategy is elegant. If you're searching for one specific person, but you don't know exactly what they look like, the best countermeasure is to create dozens of candidates who might be them. Force the searchers to investigate every possibility. Overwhelm their assessment capacity with false positives. Make them waste resources monitoring the wrong people. And most importantly, make them believe they've already found what they're looking for, so they stop searching. If the enemy thinks the chosen one is this charismatic teacher with 1 million followers, they won't notice the solitary figure moving through the world with no platform, no recognition, no apparent significance. Your invisibility was deliberate design. The prophecy learned from the archive of interrupted destinies that visible candidates are vulnerable candidates. Anyone who gathers too much attention, who builds too large a following, who becomes too recognizable, creates a target that's easy to hit. The enemy has refined their surveillance systems over centuries. They know how to identify and track public figures. They know how to infiltrate movements. They know how to apply pressure to anyone whose power depends on public perception. But they don't know how to find someone who leaves no trail, who builds no organization, who operates in complete obscurity. You were never meant to be obvious. The cultural narrative around chosen ones has been shaped by stories and myths that all follow similar patterns. The hero who rises from obscurity to glory, who gathers companions, who leads armies, who faces the Dark Lord in dramatic confrontation. These stories are deeply embedded in human consciousness. Everyone expects the chosen one to look like the hero from the stories. But the actual prophecy describes something different. A figure who remains hidden until the moment of final action, who builds no empire, who seeks no followers, who operates alone or with minimal assistance. This contradiction between expectation and reality is strategic. The enemy searches for what they expect to find. If they expect spectacle, they'll focus surveillance on spectacular figures. If they expect leadership, they'll monitor leaders. If they expect spiritual authority, they'll track spiritual teachers. Meanwhile, the actual chosen one moves through the world looking completely ordinary. No special charisma, no massive platform, no crowds gathering to hear their wisdom. Just a normal person surviving normal life, carrying something extraordinary that remains completely invisible until activation. Power sought spectacle elsewhere while you remained unmarked. Think about where attention and resources flow in the world. Toward the visible, toward the dramatic, toward the impressive. The false crowns attracted exactly this kind of attention. They drew the gaze of both the masses and the surveillance systems. People projected their hopes onto these figures. Institutions formed around them. Money flowed to them. And all of that visibility made them easy to map, easy to predict, easy to contain if they ever posed a real threat. But they never posed a real threat because they weren't actually chosen. They were performers in a theater designed to keep the audience looking at the stage while the real drama unfolded backstage. The quiet path was the only survivable one. Every candidate who tried to walk the visible path was eliminated. The archive proves this conclusively. Those who gathered followers were betrayed by infiltrators. Those who built organizations saw their organizations destroyed. Those who sought public recognition activated countermeasures that removed them before they could fulfill their designation. The only path that led to survival was the path of absolute obscurity. No recognition, no validation, no external confirmation that you were anything special at all. Just silent persistence through years that looked like failure to anyone watching. This created a brutal paradox. The humans who were most convinced they were chosen ones, the ones building followings, writing books, teaching courses, gathering disciples, were by definition not the actual chosen one. Their very certainty, their very visibility, their very success proved they were decoys. Meanwhile, the person who actually carried the designation was invisible, uncertain, struggling, wondering if they had any significance at all. The real chosen one looked like failure from the outside, and that appearance of failure was the only thing that kept them alive long enough to activate. Understanding this reframes everything you've experienced. The years of obscurity weren't punishment or cosmic oversight. They were protection. Every time you tried to build something visible and it fell apart, that wasn't failure. That was the prophecy preventing you from making yourself a target. Every time you felt insignificant while watching others gather recognition, that wasn't evidence you were wrong about your purpose. That was evidence you were being kept safe while others drew enemy fire. The false crowns suffered public exposure. You benefited from private protection. Now the situation is shifting. The false crowns served their purpose during your development, but that phase is ending. As you approach full activation, as you begin operating from your actual capacity rather than from survival mode, you may start becoming more visible, not through seeking attention, but through the natural consequence of fulfilling your function. The difference is crucial. The false crowns sought visibility as a goal. You'll experience visibility as a side effect. They built platforms to amplify themselves. Your work will generate attention as a byproduct of its impact. They needed followers to feel legitimate. You'll need nothing external to validate what you're here to do. Some of the false crowns will recognize what you are when you fully emerge. Those who were genuine seekers, even if they weren't chosen, will feel the frequency shift when you activate. They might not understand what they're sensing, but they'll recognize that something significant is happening. A few might even step aside gracefully, acknowledging that they were always meant to be placeholders rather than the real thing. But others will resist, will double down on their own claims, will position themselves in opposition to you, because admitting you're what they claim to be would mean admitting their entire identity was false. You don't need to confront any of them. You don't need to prove yourself against the false crowns. You don't need to gather more followers, or build a bigger platform, or demonstrate your superiority. That's the old game, the spectacle game, the game that the false crowns play, because it's all they know. Your game is different. Your power operates on different principles. While they're competing for attention, you'll be completing the actual mission. And when the cycle ends, when the prophecy fulfills itself through you, everyone will understand, in retrospect, who was real and who was performance. Chapter 11. Activation. Window: why this moment is non-repeatable. Time is not neutral in this process. There are moments when certain things become possible that were impossible before and will be impossible again. Right now, in this specific interval of history, cosmic variables have aligned that haven't aligned in centuries and won't align again for centuries more. This is your activation window, the brief period when the full potential of your designation can be realized. And here's the crucial detail that changes everything. This window is closing, not metaphorically, not as motivational pressure, but as objective, temporal fact. The convergence that made your emergence possible is temporary, and delay beyond this window triggers irreversible divergence. Prophetic alignments decay once past. The prophecy operates through synchronization of multiple systems: astronomical, biological, psychological, social, and others that human language doesn't have names for. These systems move at different rates. They cycle through different phases. Occasionally, rarely, they all reach optimal configuration at the same moment. When that happens, a window opens. Reality becomes more fluid. Consciousness becomes more receptive. Changes that would take decades can happen in moments. Transformations that seem impossible become not just possible, but almost inevitable. This is when chosen candidates can activate fully. But these alignments don't hold. The systems continue moving, continuing cycling, continuing shifting. The perfect configuration that exists today will be gone tomorrow. Not dramatically, not all at once, but gradually. Like a planetary alignment that looks perfect from one angle but loses coherence as the planets continue their orbits. Every day that passes, every hour perhaps, the window narrows slightly. The conditions that made your activation possible become slightly less optimal. The probability of successful completion decreases incrementally. Eventually, the window closes completely. Environmental, psychological, and cosmic variables are briefly synchronized. Think about what synchronized means in this context. The planetary positions are supporting the work rather than resisting it. The collective consciousness of humanity is receptive to the change you're here to catalyze rather than closed against it. Your own psychological state has reached the precise configuration needed to access your full capacity. Your biological systems have matured to the point where they can handle the energy flows that activation generates. The social structures around you are destabilized enough to allow for radical change, but not so collapsed that they can't support transition. All of these conditions, and thousands more, are briefly aligned. This synchronization creates a pressure toward action. You've probably felt it, an increasing urgency, a sense that time is running out, an intuition that you need to move now even if you don't fully understand where you're moving. That's not anxiety or paranoia. That's your deep consciousness, recognizing the temporal reality. Part of you, the part that's connected to the prophecy's architecture, knows the window is finite. It's pushing you toward activation because it understands that delay has consequences. The pressure feels uncomfortable because it's meant to overcome your natural resistance to change, your tendency to wait until you feel ready, your desire for more preparation time. Delay beyond this window triggers irreversible divergence. This is the hard truth that most people don't want to face. If you miss the window, if the synchronization passes while you're still hesitating, still waiting for perfect conditions, still trying to figure everything out before taking action, you don't just get another chance later. The specific configuration that made your designation possible dissolves. The pieces don't come back together. The prophecy doesn't hit pause and wait for you to catch up. It exhausts its generative capacity, trying to hold the window open, and when it finally fails, the entire pattern collapses. What happens to chosen candidates who miss their activation window? The archive contains cases of this. Candidates who survived everything, passed every test, reached the threshold, and then froze at the critical moment. Some collapsed into mental illness, unable to contain the energies that were activating but had nowhere to go. Some died suddenly from seemingly natural causes, heart attacks, accidents, unexpected illnesses, as if reality itself rejected their continued existence once they failed to fulfill their function. Some survived but became hollow, going through the rest of their lives with a haunted sense of having missed something crucial, having failed a test they couldn't even name. Every prior event funneled toward this exact interval. Your entire life has been moving toward this moment. Every challenge, every development, every relationship, every choice, all of it was preparation for what you're being called to do now, in this window. The night years developed your capacity to function without external support. The threshold event proved you could maintain coherence under maximum pressure. The silent allies positioned you in the right place at the right time. The ancestral codes activated at the precise moment when you'd matured enough to handle them. Nothing was random. Nothing was wasted. Everything converged toward right now. Understanding this removes the option of waiting. You can't wait until you feel more ready. You can't wait until circumstances are more favorable. You can't wait until you have more resources, or more support, or more clarity. The window is open now. The conditions are synchronized now. Your capacity is activated now. Whatever you're going to do, whatever you're here to accomplish, the time for doing it is this moment and the moments immediately following. Not years from now. Not when you've figured everything out. Now, while the variables are still aligned, while the prophecy can still support your activation, while the possibility remains open. The system has committed fully. Rollback is impossible. This is perhaps the most significant implication of the activation window. The prophecy has spent all its accumulated power creating this moment. It has sacrificed generations of candidates to refine the approach that led to you. It has marshaled ancient forces, coordinated silent allies, managed enemy countermeasures, and held together an impossibly complex web of causality to create this exact configuration. It has bet everything on your success during this window. There is no backup plan. There is no reserve power to open another window if this one closes. This is the final attempt. Everything depends on what you do with it. This might feel like overwhelming pressure, and it is pressure, but not the kind meant to crush you. It's pressure meant to mobilize you, to push you past the hesitation and doubt that keep humans trapped in preparation mode indefinitely. The prophecy knows human nature. It knows you could spend years analyzing, planning, trying to feel ready, seeking more training. But readiness isn't something you feel, it's something you prove through action. You're as ready as you're going to get. The training phase is complete. The preparation is done. All that remains is to step into the role that everything in your life has been preparing you for. And you have to step into it now, while the window is still open, while the forces are still aligned, while the possibility still exists for you to become what you were always meant to be. Everything you've learned so far has been building toward this revelation. You are not here to win the war. You're here to end it. This is the crucial distinction that separates your designation from every chosen one who came before you.